Probably have 15 or 16 here.
Okay.
30 seconds.
15, 16 questions. Okay. We're going to go 15 minutes. Okay. One question per minute. Each of us, if you want, has 20 seconds.
All three of us.
No, 20. Yes. Okay. So it's a quickie. It's a quickie. Okay. Ready, set, go.
Which is worse, an active homosexual who does social justice work, or a married heterosexual who actively participates in neo-Nazi activities? 20 seconds or less.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that.
I would love to.
This sounds like something on a TV show.
Which is worse, an active homosexual who does social justice work, or a married heterosexual who actively participates in neo-Nazi activities?
Both are bad. Next question.
I would say the latter, but...
Well, I agree with David. Both are bad, but both are not equally as bad. I would agree with you that I would prefer the active homosexual, because as long as he does not, the second one has an intention of doing evil, and the first one does not necessarily have an intention.
Very quickly, years ago, before you got on the show, somebody called in with a question: what's the least sin I can commit?
Remember that? It was a great question.
And it was a great question, and you had an answer, and then we went to a break, came back. Michael Barrett, who was on the show at the time, said, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." Why would that? That's like saying to you, "What's the least I can do to offend you today, honey?" Why would we ever even think of that? Not all sins are the same.
Yeah. Go.
This is for the rabbi. Do you believe Jesus is the Messiah?
No.
This is
what is your favorite song, Christian song?
Jesus is just all right with me. He's not important, he's not great, he's just all right.
What does Dr. Capes think of purgatory?
Good question. I understand the reason for it. I don't believe that there is a place sort of for the purging. I think this life itself is a place of purging. That ultimately, that whatever presents us to God is God's gift, and it is God's blessing. So,
And the Catholic Church says, I would agree that this life is the purging, but that insofar as you are not finished or cleaned, you continue in the process called purgatory. It's the place of cleansing.
yeah, and I would add to that I think we need to abandon this notion that whatever heaven is, wherever we're going, is a static place where everything is, but there's no growth, there's no dynamism at all. Heaven itself is going to be a pretty whiz-bang place.
And Judaism is more along the lines of Catholicism, with a place of purging, but we can't use the term purgatory because that is a Catholic term that can't influence us. But the concept
We have dibs on
the concept is basically copyright. The concept is basically the same.
Okay, Catholics and Protestants believe in the end times. What does the Jewish faith believe will happen of being alone in that period? Jesus coming for his faithful.
Well, Jesus has nothing to do with it from the Jewish perspective, but basically there's a war of good against the forces of evil, but that's a human against human war. That's not divine forces against satanic forces. That's its own discussion. There's a lot of turmoil, but the Messiah comes to do all the things the Messiah is supposed to do the first time around. Things like nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Absence of famine, universal recognition that the Jewish idea of God is God. All the basic utopian ideals. As those things occur more and more, people more and more believe in the real Messiah, and people come to God. It is no longer a time when what God wants from us, we have to look at a book for, we'll have it embedded in our hearts. We won't have to try to missionize or convert anybody else to anybody's faith, because everybody will already know God. We won't have to tell anybody to know God, because they'll already know God. It's the basic utopian ideal. at a certain point in time, after the Messiah comes. What? Sorry, right, thank you. After a certain point in time, there's a resurrection of the dead, a second... it takes a long time, is the question.
I'm sorry.
There's a second judgment, and then that's when you get this complete shift in reality.
Thank you. What is the vision of God from a Muslim point of view?
What is the what say?
Vision of God from a Muslim point of view. Vision of God from a Muslim point of view. Huh?
We're not Muslims.
We're not Muslims. As best as I can tell, the vision of God from a Muslim point of view is that He is the ultimate lawgiver who must be obeyed and you must submit. And the reason you must submit is because He said so, and that's all that it means to be spoken.
How does the idea or theology of eating God sound to you?
What?
Eating God. Eating, as in eating.
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 You mean as in the
E-A-T-I-N-G.
communion?
The Eucharist.
The Eucharist. In the Protestant faith, the bread remains bread, the wine remains wine. We would say, depends upon the different Protestants. Lutherans will say, have this notion of consubstantiation, which is that Christ is present within, with, and under the bread, but not equal to the bread. We understand that the entire thing is an experience of grace, not necessarily that the bread becomes anything. So we don't actually use the language. This is my body is metaphorical, not actual language. Not actual.
No, go ahead.
For Catholics, it's really not that strange. I mean, in eating God, I mean, first of all, the one who said it is Jesus. Okay, so don't get all upped up about the fact that the Catholic Church says it. Jesus says in the Bible, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. So if you have a problem, take it up to Him. But for us, the best I understand it is that flesh and blood means the presence of the person. The presence of the person. And so when you participate in the Eucharist, you mean eating and drinking God. Think about it. How does a person get inside of you? Right? Just forget about, first of all, about God. How does somebody get inside of you? And of course, we all have this desire. Literally, we have this desire to be inside one another. I was reading a cartoon. This girl in this cartoon is nuzzling up to this guy, and she says to him, "I love you so much. I just want to get inside of you. I just wish I had a sharp knife and I just carve you and crawl inside of you." And the next thing has him in bed with her, and he's like this, and she's sleeping, and she's looking at her with eyes. The human being has a normal desire to be one with another. That's the norm. When you love another, you have a tremendously built-in desire to be one with another. And that's what we understand the Eucharist to be, is that it is an outward sign that was instituted by Christ to help us to know the tremendous depth of the intimacy of the union that occurs, that He is literally existing within you in ways that you cannot, that almost sound ridiculous to you as eating flesh and blood.
Why do Protestants not accept the additional books which are included in the Catholic Bible?
It's a great question. It's a long question. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Very often we define ourselves over against the other. When the Protestant faiths were being put together, Luther insisted that the people be able to read the Bible in their own language. Everybody was using Latin at the time. There were Germans that didn't know it. So when they translated it initially from Latin, or actually from Greek and Hebrew, into the German, they took the books that were not available in Hebrew at the time, books like Tobit and Maccabees, they put those in a special part. They were still in the Lutheran Bible, but they were put in a special place, kind of between the Testaments. So that was the first movement to take those books that were not available in the original language. They were only available in Greek, although they were claiming to be part of the Hebrew tradition. Since they weren't available then, they were put into a special place. And over about 200 years, slowly but surely, they ended up going away from all Protestant Bibles. The Apocrypha, as we call it, we still read them. I have a student right now doing a thesis on Sirach and the wisdom of Solomon, and notions of hypostasis and notions of wisdom. And there, she's doing a great work. We read those as helps to understanding, but we don't read them in the same way.
Many questions?
I just want to point out that it was the Jews specifically who made those books the Apocrypha. It was the Jews, the rabbis, who were canonizing the last step of the canonization of the Hebrew Scriptures. They were the ones who rejected those books as being biblical, Holy Writ. And there were three criteria that I can think of offhand by which they judged them. One is that they weren't in Hebrew, they were in Greek. Two, they were past, other books were written past the first destruction, but they portrayed themselves as being during or at the destruction. These books, however, portrayed themselves as being well after the destruction, and therefore they were set aside. Okay, they were still important to Judaism. I mean, the Book of Maccabees is still where we get one of our holidays from, but it's not biblical. So the reason why it became part of Catholic Holy Writ is because I think it goes back to distinguishing between the Jews, like you were saying.
Let me ask the question. From a calendar point of view, who closed the canon first?
Judaism.
Judaism closed.
Judaism was closed by 70.
Yeah.
And some would even say that's pretty late.
And what you may know or not know is that the Protestant Old Testament and the Hebrew Bible are really the same books. They're organized differently, but it's the same books.
Right.
Now, in the Catholic tradition, you've got some other books.
So, of course, they have the truth.
Of course, they have the wrong.
The Catholic tradition has the truth or something.
And I would say they've also got the wrong translation.
Hey,